The rise and fall of bin Laden's network. We'll assess the current threat from Al-Qaeda and the rise of the gig economy. We'll explain what it is and why it's controversial. I'm Dana Lewis. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. Pre-trial hearings are resuming in Guantanamo Bay for the alleged ringleader of a terror attack on an American warship in the year 2000. 17 people died when a boat packed with explosives was detonated next to the USS Cole while it was in harbor in Yemen. It was one of the earliest attacks to bring the name Al-Qaeda to public attention, the precursor to 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Some 16 years later, in the world now focused on Daesh, I've been investigating the current state of the terror organization.
In Syria, the fighting is not only against Assad's forces, but there is a critical battle being waged for the leadership of what they call their holy war. And Al-Qaeda is making a comeback.
It has mutated, it has become decentralized, but make no doubts about it. Al-Qaeda is as dangerous as it has ever been.
Looking globally, then perhaps Al-Qaeda is in a much stronger position than Daesh.
Al-Qaeda was the undisputed leader in spreading terror worldwide. Its bloody records of attacks is too lengthy to mention here, but among the worst attacks. August 1998, Al-Qaeda operatives carry out the bombings of the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Just over 2 years later, the USS warship Cole bombed off the coast of Yemen. 17 sailors killed, 39 wounded. September 11, 2001, the most destructive terror attacks in history. Al-Qaeda hijacks 4 commercial airliners, crashing 2 into the Twin Towers in New York, a third into the Pentagon in Washington. Al-Qaeda's leader Osama bin Laden becomes a household hated name in America, with nearly 3,000 dead and twice that number injured. In March of 2004, the Spanish called this their 9/11. Extremists who identified with Al-Qaeda bombed 4 trains in Madrid, killing 190 people. But Al-Qaeda's savage and relentless campaign of bombings in Iraq from 2003 to 2011 eroded support for the organization among Sunnis and Shiites.
Iraq was Al-Qaeda to lose, and they've lost Iraq as a result of their brutalities, as a result of recklessness. They made enemies of everyone in Iraq. They mastered the art of making enemies and mistakes in Iraq.
The U.S. Navy SEALs then drove a dagger into the heart of Al-Qaeda in May 2011. Osama bin Laden is taken out during an assault on his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
After the killing of Osama bin Laden, it's generally accepted that Al-Qaeda ceased to exist as a centrally organized and commanded from top-down terror network. And America's relentless pursuit of Al-Qaeda figures in Afghanistan and Pakistan caused the organization to fracture and splinter into what many now term terror franchises around the world.
While we've put Al-Qaeda's core leadership on a path to defeat, the threat has evolved as Al-Qaeda affiliates and other extremists take root in different parts of the world.
In Syria, it's gone by the name of Al-Nusra Front, and it's muscular with thousands of fighters who have been fighting Daesh, also called ISIS.
There has been a civil war raging between ISIS on the one hand and Al-Qaeda affiliates on the other hand, particularly Al-Nusra Front in Syria. Al-Nusra Front now no longer exists. It has rebranded itself as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, but still it's part and parcel of Al-Qaeda. My take on it is that Al-Qaeda will most likely inherit the spoils of ISIS if and when the caliphate is dismantled, and give it a year at most.
The rebranding of Al-Qaeda's Al-Nusra is, say experts, to position them to take over parts of Syria if and when Assad is toppled.
They gain power, they gain influence, and when we actually get to some kind of transition, this will mean that Jabhat al-Nusra, or the organization formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra, will gain power and influence at the negotiating table.
And after a long silence, Al-Qaeda is suddenly speaking out. Its leader, al-Zawahiri, surfaced 3 times in video and audio recordings in August. He said Daesh is losing. And married to Zawahiri's daughter, Osama bin Laden's son, Hamza, dubbed the Crown Prince of Terror, seen in video here, but in recent weeks using audio messages. He called for new attacks on the West. Across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, Al-Qaeda has retrenched and reorganized.
If anything, you would say then that Al-Qaeda is a more potent and dangerous organization than ever.
What Al-Qaeda has been trying to do is to bide its time, because Al-Qaeda knows very well that Daesh is going to be destroyed. The American intelligence services have never taken their sight off Al-Qaeda. In the eyes of many American security services, Al-Qaeda is a serious threat because Al-Qaeda continues to plot to target the far enemy, the United States.
Active, expanding, in some cases renamed. Al-Qaeda has intelligence services worldwide worried.
And to discuss that, I'm joined now by Omar Ashur, who is a senior lecturer in security studies at Exeter University. You've also been a counterterrorism expert as well, and you've advised, among other people, you've advised, in fact, the UN, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So let's rewind back a little bit and regain our footing here, because there's a lot of layers to Al-Qaeda and their development. But if you take a look at the assassination of Osama bin Laden, this was, by all accounts, a body blow to the organization. Some people thought they were finished. What happens?
There was this thinking that bin Laden, before he dies, he comes out celebrating the Arab uprising and saying that non-violent resistance pays off, which is a complete change in Al-Qaeda's rhetoric in that sense. And then his death came to more or less marks the, many thought, the death of Al-Qaeda, but I didn't think so. I thought that there are some organizations, if you decapitate the leadership, they collapse, but not in Al-Qaeda's case, for many reasons. Part of it, it's the political environment that bred Al-Qaeda to begin with. This is in this region, it's a political environment where political violence is a way to achieve power, legitimated usually by religion, sometimes by hyper-nationalism. So Al-Qaeda was very much a part of this environment. The ideology transcends individuals, the logistics, the background, the capacities, the training that now extends over the 15 years, over 9/11.
But structurally, the organization's changed. Would you agree? From a top-down, Osama bin Laden was the figure, and now it's fractured, as we said.
Absolutely, it changed its modus operandi in many ways. It's not those secret cells that try to strike civilian targets all over the world that it was under bin Laden. It's more on a guerrilla modus operandi, if you wish, trying to control territory. I mean, a dozen countries have units that are more than sometimes 500, 600 fighters. The case, of course, in Syria, in Yemen, in the Sahel region, south of Algeria, Mali, affiliates in Libya, former affiliates in Western Desert in Egypt. So more or less an organization that has the capacity to build and control territory, and sometimes rebrands itself as what happened in the Syrian case, to send these signals that we can cooperate with like-minded organizations.
I'm confused in a way, and set me straight. You have Al-Qaeda very strong after the American invasion of 2003. Because of their tactics in Iraq, a lot of people turned away from them, Sunni and Shiite. How suddenly are they popular again?
It was, again, the political environment that led to this. There was almost a collapse of the organization. Most of the leadership, and this happened to Al-Qaeda Central as well, most of the leadership were decimated, mainly by drone strikes and by...
relentless drone strikes across the border in Afghanistan and into Pakistan.
Absolutely, hundreds of them. 2012 alone, witnessed over 100 of them. So many of the leadership were decimated. But the ability to adapt and the ability to recruit again and re-radicalize, because, again, of the political environments, because of the sectarianism that were rising in Iraq at this point, because of the disenfranchisement of the Sunni component of the Iraqi population, there was this ability to re-rise again from the ashes after being almost completely destroyed in 2012.
I want to ask
2010, sorry.
why, and I assume it's not a coincidence, are we suddenly hearing from Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda? We are hearing from Osama bin Laden's son. We're hearing about who used to be in the shadows, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Why now?
Mainly because there is this resurgent trend. There is this capacity and understanding that the more we use the propaganda, the more we are there in the media, the more we have the ability to recruit and to radicalize, and the more we are able to send these signals that we still exist, we are expanding, we are enduring, if to take the motto of the Islamic State, the other extreme organizations that showed up after 2011, 2012.
It's a recruiting drive.
It's a recruiting drive on one end, but also the symbolism here is very high, because Hamza bin Laden is there because he's the son of Osama bin Laden. And the idea that the generational leadership continues to be able to recruit more followers, I think it's very critical for them.
Is he the heir apparent?
Symbolically, yes, but in terms of capabilities, we're still unsure.
Counterterrorism advisor. You talk about the splintering and this fragmentation of Al-Qaeda. It has to have become much more difficult to track the organization, not less difficult, because now you have them everywhere with their own cells and structure of command and control regionally in different regions.
It is much more difficult because mainly of the logistics and because of the size of the organizations now, because how much intricated in local politics, and we need to, there are people who support not Al-Qaeda as an ideology, but Al-Qaeda as a fighting against dictatorships in the case of Syria, for example. So you will have this level of support in some areas. So it's much more difficult to counter them. However, there are the usual security measures, the drone strikes in terms of tactics, the cooperation with partners on the ground in terms of fighting them on the ground, the cases that we have from Algeria all the way to Afghanistan, but also the part to counter the propaganda, which is the counter narrative, the counter ideology aspect of it, which the UN has been dealing with. But finally, it will come to the political environment. Can the political environment in this region be fixed, and can we translate the political and social conflict into constitutions, electoral politics, as opposed to bullets that more or less Al-Qaeda feeds on that.
Omar Ashur, thank you so much for joining us and talking about it.
Thank you.
This is Insight. Coming up, we'll explain what people mean by the gig economy and why it's controversial.